Japan is known around the world for many things. Its long storied history, its pop culture, anime, manga, AKB48, its Shinkansen bullet trains. What many people don't know, however, is that cities in Japan are some of the most accessible in the world for people with disabilities. It isn't perfect, no place is, and we will get into the faults, but Japan has done a lot of good, and I want to discuss how they've managed to build what they have and why it matters. Welcome everyone. If you're new to the channel, my name is Imre. You're watching Uniquely Unseen, where I talk about urban planning, accessibility, public transit, and history. If you enjoyed today's piece, please feel free to subscribe and leave a comment down below, letting me know what you think. Let's get into it. The reasons why Japan can be so accessible for people with disabilities, of course, depend on the disability trying to be accommodated. For today's video, I'm going to focus largely on people who have a visual impairment or who are blind, because that is what I know. If you have a personal anecdote or experience with any disability living or traveling to Japan, please let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Broadly speaking, accessibility in Japan can be boiled down to four main factors: zoning, access to transit, access to things like tactile paving or braille in public spaces, and the second order effects of policies surrounding car ownership and public transportation. Zoning is the bedrock upon which towns and cities are built. It is designating where things should go and how many and why. Very often in the United States and Canada, cities are developed in a very restrictive Euclidean way, where effectively every type of zoning, commercial, residential, industrial, has its own separated place. This is why in the United States, many people have to drive from their home to a shop rather than being able to walk down the street. In fact, most trips in the United States are less than 3 miles. Occasionally, you will have cities that allow for additional residential units upon a single-family home property, but in large part, most American cities have a bedrock of single-family homes. If they are lucky, they have grandfathered in some type of mixed-use development or higher density development. Often, this is more due to negligence on the part of zoning committees than it is active attempts at preservation. While there has been a movement to increase the amount of multi-use, mixed-use developments across the United States, these pale in comparison to the quantity of single-family home developments. Additionally, such multi-use developments are often the result of infill projects, rather than building from the ground up a mixed-use town or mixed-use area. The way Japan handles zoning is much different and much similar to that of what you find in Europe. Indeed, the way Japan's zones are structured is along similar lines of residential, commercial, and industrial uses. However, looking at this chart of the 12 different types of Japanese zoning, we can see that there is an added density component and components selected out for what types of civic institutions, like schools or hospitals or small shops, can be placed in a given zone. As you move further right and up on the chart, you will find more use cases being permitted. In the lowest density residential zone, you can still find multifamily shops, schools, clinics, small shops, and office spaces. This is much different than what you find in North America, and it allows for a much more dynamic living environment. The only zoning criteria comparable to its North American counterpart would be the exclusively industrial zones. Oddly enough, the quasi-industrial zone to the left is the most permissive out of everything. What this leads to is Japanese cities and towns having the capacity to be much more human-scale places to live. Sure, it might be low-density residential or medium-density commercial, but on the whole, you're still permitted to build multi-family homes. You're still permitted to build similar businesses. It's just about what density you wish to have. This approach to zoning also greatly impacts access to public transportation and transit services more broadly. In Japan, most railway companies, as just one example, rely on real estate revenues in order to subsidize their public transportation services. They are able to do this because the land around their stations is considered high value. They are able to develop it into dense, mixed commercial and residential properties. In Tokyo, this might take the form of a large mall like the Ueno Mall, but this is a common practice across the country. Sapporo, Fukuoka, Osaka, Kyoto. It doesn't matter where you are, transportation companies are able to develop high-density, attractive places for people to go. Transit stations are a destination. It is understood that they are not something you just use to go from point A to point B. They can be a destination into themselves. Meanwhile, in the United States, transit companies, due to various factors, primarily the restrictive zoning and car-centric attitudes of Americans, must surround their stations not with residential or commercial properties from which they could extract rent. Rather, they must surround them with parking. This leads to many transit authorities being at the mercy of political winds. During times of austerity, transit is often the first of many items on public budgets to be cut. Most Americans who don't live in a select few areas simply have no knowledge of what a reliable, robust transit service, whether we're talking buses or metro, should or could be like. There are millions of people in the United States who have a visual impairment, and millions more with other disabilities. For those who can still drive, physically speaking, it means that you are putting yourself and others at risk, if only to have independence, because there is no other way to have independence in this country if not by driving. Public transportation has been so ignored that even services such as paratransit, which are meant to help people with disabilities of all stripes to navigate their community and get where they need to go, are underfunded and reliant on transit existing in order to provide service. If a person wants to access paratransit, they must live within 3/4 of a mile of existing transportation stations. How common do you really think that is in average suburban America? Not very. Let's quickly talk about tactile paving and Braille. For those unaware, tactile paving are these bumped, dotted bricks that you'll sometimes see at curbsides in the United States. They're meant to help people with visual impairments know when they are at a curb by feel of their feet or with a cane. By contrast, in Japan, where these tactile paving bricks were invented, the general consensus is that they are utilized more to help people navigate public spaces like sidewalks and even cruise ships. Additionally, paving bricks have been innovated on, as some now contain LED lights to help low-vision people navigate in low-light situations. While you may think that everything in Japan revolves around public transportation, that is of course not the case. People own cars, as they do across the world. But how Japan treats them is quite different. For example, in Japan, if you own a car, you must provide proof of a private parking space, which means that there's less demand for on-street parking, meaning streets can be more narrow. There can be more pedestrian-centered development. People with disabilities, therefore, are able to walk with more safety. In Tokyo and other major metropolitan areas, train stations play jingles when a train comes into the station. While this is very helpful for everyone, it provides a mnemonic device that the blind and visually impaired can use to know when they are at a station. I made a whole video about this, so if you want to check it out in more depth, I'll leave a link in the description down below. With all of these factors considered, Japan seems like a wonderful place for people with visual impairments and other disabilities to live. However, employment numbers tell a slightly different story. In the United States, employment numbers for people with visual impairments or who are blind stand at around 22%. In Japan, the number is less than 5%. Japan has 400,000 people with visual impairments or blindness living in the country, and of those employed, 60% work in massage therapy and acupuncture, where they have a functional legal monopoly. While employment is not everything, I think being employed, working in the community, provides people a lot of good in addition to money, which we all need to survive on. If you have any thoughts on why the employment rate is the way it is, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Just for the record, I don't think this detracts from the fact that Japan is a vastly more accessible place to live. I just think it's an oddity of statistics. Thank you for taking the time to watch today's video. I'll see you in the next one.